Hello everybody, this is John Mark Johnson Jr. again, host of Reformed GGA, and I'm here to do an update video on the SR22. When you guys saw it last, I had not yet fired it. I basically just cleaned the gun and talked about some of its basic functionality. Briefly I talked about how you field strip it, reassemble it, those kinds of things, but I hadn't shot it yet. Well, since the last time you guys saw this gun, I have in fact had the chance to go out and shoot it with a couple of other people, and I'm happy to report that at least so far we haven't put a ton of rounds through it, somewhere between 50 and 100 rounds, between 5 and 10 magazines. I wasn't keeping an exact count, but for 50 to 100 rounds it seems to be doing just fine. And we did test 3 different kinds of ammunition through it. We tested the Browning lead round nose, bulk pack 22 ammunition, I believe it was the 40 grain stuff. We also tried the 36 grain hollow points Remington golden bullets, which are just about as cheap can get, and those ran just fine. And most of the ammunition that we put through the gun was this CCI clean stuff, which is 40 grain, high velocity stuff. And this stuff was actually kind of funny to procure. I went into Sportsman's looking for ammunition, and they're out of like just about everything, especially any of the bulk stuff. And I noticed some of this on the shelf, and what I found curious about it is they actually had a decently good supply of this stuff around. And I thought that was kind of odd. We're cleared out of all the other bulk stuff, but 22 plinking ammunition we have a decently good supply of. I'm trying to figure out what is going on. Why aren't people buying this? And so I watched people a little bit come by and investigate, and they'd pick it up and they'd look at it, do one of these things where they look at the bottom and then they'd put it back on the shelf. Well, what they were looking at was the fact that the label was pink and the bullets are pink, and it's mostly guys that are looking at this and they decide, that's not the ammo for me. And I get it. But what is that old saying that if you don't want someone at the range to steal your mag loader, get the pink one? Well, it seems to also turn out that if you want to make sure that nobody messes with your ammo, get the pink ammo. Guess it works as well. Turns out that the stuff runs just fine, and as long as you don't mind having pink ammo in your gun, it works. It's weird and it's kind of bizarre looking and a little funky. But the stuff seems to work just fine, and we didn't have any malfunctions with any of the ammos that we tested. Now granted, this was not by no means an exhaustive test, and like I said, 50 to 100 rounds, especially for 22 LR, doesn't mean a whole lot. If you fire any gun long enough, hard enough, under extreme enough conditions, with maybe poor enough quality of ammo, eventually you're going to get a malfunction of some kind. Either the gun will get dirty and the slide will start hanging up, and you'll get either failure to extract issues or failure to feed issues. If the gun gets worn enough, old enough, eventually the springs will start to wear out and you might get light primer strikes. Or maybe if you dry fire the gun too much, you'll wind up ruining the surface interactions between the barrel and the firing pin, wear down either one of those, either the back of the chamber or the firing pin itself, and you can get light primer strikes, etc., etc. You run any gun long enough, hard enough, under extreme enough conditions, and or with poor quality ammo, and yeah, you're going to get malfunctions. And I don't expect that this gun is going to be absolutely perfect under all conditions, but under what I would consider to be normal range conditions, we didn't have any problems this time, and I was very pleased about that. Now, there are a few things from the first video that I mentioned in the first video, I should say, that I wanted to go ahead and address here. One of the concerns I mentioned in the first video was the possibility of hammer bite with the larger grip. And that's what is on it right now, is this larger grip that has a little bit of a hump on it. And I stuck with the larger grip because it's just simply more comfortable to hold on to. This gun is actually a very small gun. I explained that in the last video. It is tiny. This is, you know, definitely a subcompact. It's borderline getting into the pocket gun territory. It's a very small gun. And so in order to feel like you actually have something to hold on to, the larger grip is kind of necessary for that. The problem though is that the larger grip has this hump and it pushes your hand up at kind of a weird angle, And for me, I get a high grip anyways, but for me, it puts my hand right on the hammer. And in the course of shooting this, I did actually get a little bit of hammer bite. Now, fortunately, it's 22 LR, and so it's not super powerful. And the position that it's hitting at doesn't actually pinch anything, so it didn't draw blood, but there was definitely a little bit of a rash there. You could definitely tell where the hammer had been rubbing on my hand. Is it enough to make me want to change out this grip for the small one? No. As long as if I'm not firing, 500 rounds in a day or something like that, some fairly high volume, like I said, it's not enough to actually draw blood or anything like that. So I'd rather, keep the grip the way that it is, maintain control of the gun while I'm shooting it, and just put up with the mild irritation of a little bit of hammer bite, more like hammer irritation, and just deal with that. So is it an issue? Technically, yes. Is it enough to keep me from running the gun as it is with the larger grip on it? No, and I don't think that most people would. And like I said, depending on where you grip the gun, how high your grip is, it might not even be an issue for you. One of the shooters that we had out there was a female shooter with a little bit smaller hands, and she did just fine with it. No hammer bite whatsoever, but I and the other gentleman that was there, we both experienced just a little bit of hammer bite. I was definitely on the worst side just because I prefer a really high grip on the gun. So is it a possible issue depending on how you hold the gun and which grip you have on the gun? Yes. But like I said, unless you're doing a really high volume, it's probably not going to be enough to even break the skin. So probably not that big of an issue in the long run. Another thing that I wanted to revisit from the first video was the very long double action trigger pull here. Make sure the magazine is empty here. But yeah, the double action trigger pull on this thing is super, super, super long and stagey and gritty and just all kinds of awful. But once I was out there shooting, and especially once you get a good solid two-handed grip on it, it's still a long, gritty, heavy trigger pull. It's like almost an 11-pound trigger pull. But it's not so bad as to completely ruin the experience. This is definitely not a target precision 22 handgun. It's not going to be a buckmark or anything like that anytime soon. But as a recreational plinking gun with targets that are relatively close, 5 yards, 7 yards, 10 yards, maybe 15 yards, becomes a little harder at that point, but no more than 15 yards. And as long as they're decently good size, you're not trying to get super precise with it, I think it'll suit those kinds of purposes just fine. So as a recreational gun, at relatively close distances with decently large targets, a good 8-inch target or something like that, yeah, you're going to be able to put every shot on target at least. It might not all be in the bullseye, but you'll at least be able to hit the targets every time. So that is a bonus in that regard. So yeah, the double action trigger pull, yeah, it is awful, but for the intended purpose, it is workable. Another thing that did prove to be an interesting, maybe we could call it an advantage while we're out there that we discovered, is that this gun, you can charge it while it's on safe. So the safety is on, and you can still go ahead and rack the slide, even though it is on safe. And so that means that you can put the magazine in, you can charge it without ever having to take the gun into a condition where it can be fired. And that is something that I actually really like, especially for recreational purposes at the range. You can hand the gun to someone who's relatively inexperienced. You still want them to know the basic rules of firearm safety and how different kinds of platforms work and all that, but relatively inexperienced, and just have that added peace of mind that until they're actually on target, that they don't actually have to take the gun off safe. Like I said, it just adds a little bit of extra peace of mind. And so I did like that about it. I still argue that that safety is goofy, because I have no idea why on earth you would have this kind of platform for a gun, an autoloader platform, and yet make the safety such that down is safe. On almost every other autoloader that is out there, down is fire. It's not safe. It's backward. It's goofy. But being that as it is, one of the quirks of the design is that it allows you to charge the gun even while it's on safe. And that is cool and that is notable, and I think it does have, just like I said, an added peace of mind to it. Also, since the last time that I've talked to you guys, I've been looking at the owner's manual for this thing. And in the first video, I mentioned that I don't think of this as a very good candidate for concealed carry purposes, for defensive use. And first of all, that's just because it's 22 LR, and 22 LR is not very powerful, especially out of a handgun. And then there's also, like I said, the issue with the safety that's backwards that could cause problems in a defensive situation. But even since then, looking in the manual, the folks over at Ruger are fairly paranoid about you carrying this gun in a ready condition. They recommend that if you have to carry the gun with rounds in the handle, that you do not have a round loaded in the chamber. And they also have a big warning in there about possible drop safety issues, that if you drop the gun, it may accidentally discharge and whatnot. Which is weird, because when you open up the gun, there is a drop safety block in there. So either that drop safety block doesn't work, or Ruger is just being paranoid and covering all of their bases or whatnot. But whatever the case may be, Ruger does not recommend carrying this gun with a round in the chamber. And you combine that with the fact that it's a fairly weak caliber and the safety is backwards, I'm still going to have to go with what I originally said about this not being a good candidate for self-defense use. But for what I bought it for, a gun that could take relatively cheap ammo and have some recreational value to it. Like I said, it's not a precision shooter. The trigger pull is terrible. It's very short gun. Like I said, this thing verges on being a pocket gun, so it has a very short sight radius. Fully adjustable rear sight, though. I do like that, and at the range that did prove to be useful. The windage sight was not really easily adjustable at the range because I didn't have a screwdriver that was that small, but the elevation was such that I could just adjust it with my thumb, and that was helpful. But yeah, I would not suggest it for self-defensive use. It's just too quirky, but for a recreational purpose of use, provided you're not, trying to do precision shooting with it or something like that. And also keeping in mind the possibility of using it as a gun for people who are new to shooting and things like that, or perhaps don't have a whole lot of grip strength so that they can actually rack the slide and stuff like that. It works. Now, like I said, I wouldn't recommend it as a defensive gun, and it's definitely not a precision target gun. But recreationally, as a fairly safe gun to use recreationally, just because you can charge it while it's still unsafe and things like that, and it is pretty easy to rack. I think it works for that kind of purpose. So overall, what is my rating for the gun so far? If I had to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, where would I put it? I would say for its purpose of use, okay, as a recreational, non-precision gun, geared more so towards beginners, I would put it at least a solid 7 or 8. I do not like that for a gun for that purpose that new people could encounter that you have a backward safety, because that means you're training them wrong, so I'm definitely going to ding them for that. And the fact that it can give you hammer bite depending on how you're holding it, for new shooters that can cause some problems. But other than that, it's actually a really solid gun and pleasure to shoot, and in our experience so far, it's only been 50 to 100 rounds, but in our experience so far, pretty reliable. Now yes, if you push the gun to extremes, eventually you're probably going to find a point where it won't work. You get either the wrong kind of ammunition for it, you get it dirty enough that the slide stops working correctly, and you'll get feeding issues or extraction issues of some kind, etc., etc., or the gun gets old and the springs start wearing out and you start getting light primer strikes and things like that. Eventually all guns are going to break and become unreliable. But for a rimfire gun that's on the less expensive side as far as guns in total go, I'm pretty impressed with it. It works, it is reliable, it is small, but it still has a decent feel. The trigger is not great, but it is functional on short range targets that are decently large. for everything that it is meant to be, it's a solid little gun. Like I said, it's a good solid 7 or 8 for the intended purpose. And so if you happen to be in that market, you're looking for a recreational handgun that's going to be relatively cheap to shoot and, you know, relatively reliable, and something that, you know, is going to be conducive to a wide range of different kinds of users, I would seriously take a good hard look at the SR22. I wouldn't call it perfect. It's certainly not something that I would consider for self-defense or precision target usage, but general recreation, it's solid. It does have some quirks, but on the whole, I'd say it's a good gun. Alright, that is the update thus far. When we have more rounds through it, we'll let you guys know if anything changes. Until then, thank you very much for your time. Bye-bye.